Hey, Nick.
Alberto, it's fantastic to talk to you.
Likewise. I guess that we should explain to people watching this video why we are talking to each other today.
Yeah. So I noticed, I think, what was probably 2, 3 months ago, that as it turns out, we have the exact same launch date for our upcoming books,
Which
November
is a
15th.
it's a great coincidence. And I see
Yeah,
I see your book in the background over there, Practical
that's
Charts.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
going to be the one that comes out on the 15th.
And your copy of my new book also is going your way. So
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. My copy or your copy of my book is coming your way.
It's coming my way.
Unfortunately,
Yeah,
that's
but
right. Yeah,
we were lucky enough to be able to read PDF, even early versions of the book, of each one book, while
yeah.
they
Of
were being
course,
written.
yeah. I guess we exchanged kind of manuscripts probably around the same time, about two,
Yeah,
3 months ago.
yeah,
Real delight to to read even a work in progress, I think.
yeah. Likewise, I learned a lot from the book, and we decided to have a sort of like a casual conversation, asking each other sort of like similar questions. And so, for example, we could begin by, I could begin by asking, why did you decide to write Practical Charts with so many books about data visualization out
Yeah.
there? Why is there a need for? I have the answer to that question, but I would like to I would like you to talk a
Those who
bit
don't know, yeah. Um, yeah, and of course, in the interest of transparency, we did kind of exchange some question notes
Mhm.
earlier, and so I did have a bit of a chance to think about it, and that's kind of lucky because I really did have to think about it. Like, why did I write this book?
Mhm.
And I think there's probably, I would say, three main reasons. The first was because basically, I spend a lot of my time teaching, private workshops to all sorts of different types of people who have very widely varying, backgrounds. Some of them know very little about data visualization. Some of them know a lot, and they tend to, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, certainly the majority, are not really passionate about data visualization. They're business intelligence people. They just need to be able to create charts that essentially nobody's going to complain about, that don't accidentally misrepresent the data, and that basically, to be honest, aren't going to kind of embarrass them, right? Where somebody's going to call out a chart in a meeting and go, come on, like, this is obviously the wrong chart type or the wrong color scheme.
Mhm.
And so I felt that a lot of the books that were kind of out there, and courses, I felt there's an opportunity to basically be sort of much more targeted on that. I'm not going to make you an expert. I'm not going to teach you how to create beautiful charts, make charts, data beautiful, or even really a lot of storytelling. I'm just going to teach you what I call the spelling and vocabulary of data
Mhm.
visualization.
Which
And
is something
so,
that I really love, and it's one of the commonalities. As different as our books are,
yes.
it's amazing how much overlap there is in the way
Mhm.
that we think and we speak about data
I
visualization. I
yeah, I
love that
absolutely
language.
noticed that. Yeah, like, even though you're right, of course, we'll talk about your book in a moment, but it is very different, of course, than mine. Like, I think that everyone in your book is an expert. They are passionate about data visualization, whereas I'm targeted at my book at a very different group. Like, these are
Mhm.
people who are just. I mean, that's why I called it practical charts, right? It's not
Yeah.
beautiful charts. It's not
It's super practical.
sophisticated
You
charts.
have
It's
this
just
definition. You have this definition in the book, which I love because it's the way also that I see data visualization. Right? You say that
mhm.
charts are graphics for doing a job. I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely love that.
Yeah, and although, I think that one of the things that I realized in reading your book is that, really, I think that's a good definition in the little corner of data visualization in which I operate. And that's one of the things I
Mhm.
really loved about your book, is that it was just this really visceral reminder that that is just a little corner,
Mhm.
and that, of course, data visualization is much broader. And I tend to forget about that. And
Mhm.
so,
We all do. It's like we all do,
yeah,
right? It's very easy to try. There is a warning in the Art of Insight, as you know, that it is very easy to assume that everybody sees the language that we use in the same way. And that is
yeah,
not the case. It all depends on purpose, which is something that your own book makes extremely clear. Again, with this definition, charts are graphics for doing a job, but that job may differ, maybe so depending on the circumstances, depending on the purpose, depending on the goal, you may
yeah.
use the language in one way or in another way. Mhm.
Yeah, and but one of the things, like I said, that I really liked about your book is that you kind of reminded me that that's not always the case. right? You don't always have to have kind of a job in mind, a question you're trying to answer, a problem you're trying to explain to people. You can, it's perfectly valid to approach a data visualization without a job, a purpose in mind, and kind of see where it
without a
goes.
functional purpose or an analytical purpose, right? But you could
Yes,
have
that's true.
like a poetic purpose, right?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
tend
Or
we
kind
both
of
tend to
essay, as you
an
put it.
essay,
Yeah.
exactly. We both tend to equate data visualization to a language that
Mm-hmm.
has a particular syntax and a grammar and symbols, spelling, as you say. It's like written language. Written language can be used for effective communication, and there is a right way to do that, right? Try to write
Yeah.
concisely, clearly, etc. But written language can be used for poetic purposes, right? To express yourself,
Of
and the
course.
language will be completely different, right? I see data visualization in a similar way. We both share the same view of data visualization, right? You come from a
Yeah.
world of analytics. I come from a world of the world of data journalism, and we are all for clear, straightforward, classical graphics, as efficient as possible, as quick as possible. But it is super important, as you say, to never forget that the world is much broader than the world
Yeah.
that we inhabit, right? Well,
Yeah. I find it, so helpful to think in that way of
yeah.
data visualization as a language. To be honest, though, when I'm talking about it to others and I'm wondering how other people are going to respond to this video, I think it does kind of stump people sometimes. It's like, what do you
Mhm.
mean a language? Like
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
shapes and colors and stuff. That's not a language, right?
Yeah, but
But I think there's
it's a
just
set of symbols. It's a set of
exactly.
symbols that are arranged according to a syntax, to a system, so
Yeah.
that in order to be able to communicate either to yourself when you are analyzing data, or
Of
to
course.
others
Yeah.
when you're trying to convey ideas or emotions or feelings or whatever it is to other people. So in that very broad, very loose sense, it is absolutely a language.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I'm certainly not disputing it. Obviously, I agree with it.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes people have trouble kind of making
Yeah.
that leap.
Making
Maybe
that.
in my environment where they're like, they tend to be
Yeah.
very kind of pragmatic and like,
Yeah.
just get me from A to B as soon as I
Yeah.
can. So there are other reasons why I wrote the book, and I kind of made some quick notes here.
Mhm.
I guess the other reason is I was just so kind of often shocked and disappointed at the what I consider to be basic mistakes. And I know that's a kind of a loaded term when it comes
Mhm.
to data visualization or any other language for that matter.
Mhm. Mhm.
But even from like major news media outlets, universities, research
Mhm.
institutions, high tech companies, I was just like, wow, like
Yeah.
clearly, not starting the scale at 0 or using a categorical color palette or whatever. It was not the right choice here. It's strong risk of misrepresenting the data. And I felt that there was an opportunity to really kind of get more formal
Mhm.
about these kinds of things, like, and not really sort of imposing them as rules. Like, I know I love your epilogue of the book where you talk about sort of prescriptive versus normative,
Mhm. Mhm.
or descriptive, and I didn't want to be prescriptive. Generally, I'm not a prescriptive person. I like to think so anyways. I'm not saying you should do it my way or the highway,
Mhm.
but there are certain sort of basic fundamentals, just as
Yeah.
there are in language.
Mhm.
Like if you start playing around too much with spelling and basic grammar and syntax, then you're going to confuse people and you're going to mislead them. And I thought there was an opportunity for a book that kind of tried to make that as sort of codified and formal as possible. But in the beginning of the book, in the introduction, I do qualify it as saying, they're not rules, right? They're guidelines. They're
Yeah.
ways for people to get up and running quickly, especially people who maybe don't have that much experience. I love your analogy. At one point, you called it sort of like training wheels on a
Mhm.
bicycle, to prevent people from falling over, right? Making these really basic mistakes. And so I just felt that there was an opportunity there, or could have maybe a bit of a gap for a book that just made that as sort of as formal as possible, but without being prescriptive.
Overly
I
prescriptive.
always say, like, of
Yeah.
course, once you achieve a certain level of expertise, you can absolutely go outside of these
Yeah.
guidelines, knock
Yeah.
yourself out, but at
Which
least,
is something that we have debated over social media several times, right? For
yeah.
example, when you started posting in social media your decision tree diagram, we had this conversation about being too prescriptive, or perhaps people relying too much on the training wheels, which is something that I always
Mhm.
fear that. But in hindsight, I think that it's such a great idea. This decision tree, this just for people to understand what we're talking about, what you have in the book is essentially choose your own adventure. type of diagram, right?
Kind of,
If you
yeah.
show these, then go this way, go to page 105. If you want,
Right.
and then after that, if you want that, you go here or you go here. I think that that's genius. It's great. That's a fantastic training wheel. You
Yeah,
start,
yeah.
you begin
Yeah,
with that, and
exactly.
then you will be able to develop sort of like understand the reasoning behind the decision tree, and then decide whether you can choose other paths outside of the decision
Exactly.
tree.
Yeah, exactly. Once you understand the underlying logic, then you know when to deviate from it. But there's so many people out there who just don't. And what they are often sort of taught is or presented with in, you know, books and courses and whatnot is, you know, okay, so you're showing the breakdown of a total. Sometimes it makes sense to use a bar chart, sometimes a stacked bar chart, sometimes, you know, a pie chart. Do what feels right. It's like, whoa, hold on a second. You know, those
Exactly.
are not interchangeable. Like there are
Yeah.
specific circumstances when it does and does not make sense to use those chart types. And so, you know, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of like chart type chooser diagrams that are floating around out there. And to be honest, I think that they're problematic because that's often the way they operate is like, you know, here's some ideas,
Here is the
use your
menu.
judgment.
Yeah,
But
it's
it's like,
like,
what if I don't have that judgment? You know, like what if I
yeah.
don't have years of
How
data
do you
visualization
develop it? Yeah.
experience?
How do you
Yeah.
develop the
Yeah.
judgment? Yeah. 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 So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a great idea. It's a great idea because it's great for beginners, or it's great for people who are overly busy, and perhaps people who are not as enthusiastic as we are about data visualization. I just want to get
Exactly.
something practical and fast.
That's
Mhm.
my market is, you know, people who basically just want to get in and out as fast as they can because they're busy and they have other things to do. They just want to make charts that aren't going to embarrass them or accidentally
Yeah.
mislead
Yeah.
their audience. So
Yeah.
let me turn the question around. So what prompted you to write this book? Of course, it's not your first book. Is it what, your fourth or fifth, I think?
It's actually the sixth book if we
Sixth book.
count,
Okay.
yeah, if we count books in Spanish, yeah, and perhaps the seventh if we count also my PhD dissertation, which I put online as a PDF years ago. Yeah, I mean, the Art of Insight is a very strange book. Certainly, it's very different to the ones that I wrote before. It's my most personal book ever, so there's a lot of me in the book, a lot of personal thoughts, a lot of sort of like references to philosophers and to thinkers of different kinds. Mainly because I don't disclose this in the book, but I ended up in data visualization by happenstance. I even ended up in my career as a journalist by happenstance. I didn't want to be a journalist. I wanted to study philosophy and history. So I've always been reading about philosophy and history. But while reading, I've always found ways to sort of like connect my external interests to visualization, to information graphics, to information design, so on and so forth. I wrote The Art of Insight for several reasons. One of them is, and I make that explicit in the prologue, I needed to find a way to rekindle my passion for data visualization. I've been working in information design more broadly and more specifically on data visualization for many years. And I felt a little bit burned out for a while. It's like I started getting a little bit bored about what I was teaching. I felt that I was always teaching the same thing. I said, well, let me cast a very wide net. Let me talk to people, because The Art of Insight, despite of its title, is not a book about analytical insight. It's a book about insight in the sense of looking into people's brains, into people's minds.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
a book about the
Interpersonal
people.
insight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about people. It's not about the work. The
Yeah.
work is just to make the book more beautiful and more attractive. And certainly there's great work by so many people in the book, but it's a book about the people, the motivations, the way that they think about their graphics, the way that they do things. And when I was putting together a list of people to talk to, I make this explicit also in the prologue. I didn't do anything particularly representative as a sample. I just made a very long list of people whose work I really like. And I said, let me talk to these people and let me interrogate them about the way that they think and talk. In some cases, some conversations were very humorous. In some cases, they work into very dark places, which I found really interesting. But I found it absolutely fascinating. And it is also a way to show the huge variety of approaches to visualization, the different types of, let's say, ideologies or dialects in data visualization that I think that strengthen each other, that they can feed into each other somehow. So it was, again, a way for me to recover the passion a little bit and also show other people, perhaps newcomers to the field. Here are, tons of well-established people right? Highly trained, very experienced, but they all came from somewhere, right? They all began from nothing, and this is how they did it, and this is the way that they did it. And I found that really, really fascinating. In the middle, also, as you know, I also introduced my own way of doing things, which is very similar to yours, right? The decision making in visualization. So it's a very quirky book, I would say. I'm decently happy with the outcome, but it's also, I think, the strangest among my books.
Yeah. I mean, it's initially when you were sort of describing it to me as sort of a book without a central thesis or a central idea, at least kind of coming into it, I was a little a little skeptical. The sort of the structured analytical part of my brain had trouble latching onto it. But then when I read it, I was like, yes, of course, like that was absolutely the right way to approach this, right? Is just sort of, as you said, kind of going out there and just seeing how people think, seeing what they do, and sort of seeing what kind of comes out of it.
And there is a metaphor behind the book. So there's certainly not a central thesis, but there is a narrative thread, which I make explicit. I think that in chapter 2, something like that, I refer to the Odyssey. Odysseus is a Odyssey through the Mediterranean, right?
Yeah.
It's like going back home, right? Odysseus goes to the war of Troy, then he gets stranded in the Mediterranean, but he always goes back home, right? So I equate that to the experience of writing the book. First of all, I go as far away as I can from the way that I do things. So the book begins with what people that I call eccentrics, right? People who make graphics that are very, very different to the graphics that I produce. And then little by little, I started returning to Ithaca, right? I started returning to my own way of doing things and to re-encounter myself in some way, right? But I come back home, I come back to Ithaca, having learned a lot from people who, inhabit other shores, distant shores.
Right. So do you feel kind of reinvigorated, less burnt out about data visualization?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there are many things that I have begun incorporating to my own teachings, to my own classes, trying to expose students to the big landscape in data visualization. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of your own practice, like when you're creating, visualizations, do you find that it's changed the way that you work? Or
it has not changed that much. I still stick to sort of like a type of journalistic graphics that I have always produced, but I've certainly started incorporating them into my classes, particularly university classes, trying to expose students to these other ways of thinking about data visualization. So I make very clear what I teach is the way that I do things, and here are the reasons why I do things this way. But be aware that there are other people out there, and I try to expose them. I have sort of like guest speakers every semester. I should invite you next semester.
Sure, yeah.
To present that.
So I'd love to.
Yeah, it would be great. So I had people like Amanda McCulloch and Steve Wexler, people who work more on the analytical side of things, and then people who I spoke to for the book, Federica Fragapane, people like that who are more on the artistic end of the spectrum, trying to expose the students to these multiplicity of dialects of visualization, and students really appreciate it. Even students, many of my students come from a data science background, so they are very similar to both of us, but they really enjoy looking beyond the boundaries, right? The established boundaries of the field.
Yeah, no, I totally believe that. Like I said, that was probably the biggest kind of personal takeaway for me from the book was just I was going to say reminder, but it was more than a reminder of how broad the field can be, because I didn't really know, like there are so many kind of areas that I was like, oh yeah, I'd never really even seen visualizations like this. So important. Again, coming back to the language analogy, like language can be used for so many things. And I think that even if you're writing, patent applications, knowing about poetry and about all these other different ways of using language is incredibly useful, and it actually makes you a better user of the language. And so even though most of the visualizations in your book are, again, very different than the kinds of visualizations that I create, I know that my visualizations are better because I'm more familiar with the different ways in which the language is being used.
Yeah. And what about your book? did you change the way that you do things while writing the book or after you wrote the book?
Well, I mean, my book came together a little bit differently because most of the development of the core ideas and whatnot happened while I was developing the practical charts course. And so, as you know, I started out teaching the courses of Stephen Few, did that from 2014 to about 2019. Steve retired, and then I decided at that point, I was going to start creating my own courses. But I'd actually started creating notes a number of years even before that, saying, oh, if one day I do my own course, I would like to talk about this and these topics and whatnot. And so most of the heavy lifting really occurred while I was developing the course, which was sort of 2019. And then I think the first time I delivered it was maybe mid 2020, and it had undergone a number of substantial iterations during that time. And so I thought that by the time I sat down to write the book, it would be easy. It was not.
It's never easy.
No, for sure. Even though the course, and of course, in writing the book, I ended up actually going back and ripping the course apart and putting it back together again, because as you probably know, the process of actually writing a book about something really forces you to think differently about it. But certainly, like the decision trees, for example, came out of my work on the course. I ended up actually refining them, in some cases, refining them quite a bit in the book. But that was where kind of the heavy lifting kind of took place. So I guess the question for me really was teaching data visualization and developing a data visualization course, did that change the way that I create charts? And oh yeah, it absolutely did.
There's something interesting about what you're saying, just came to my mind, that there is a dirty little secret about writing books that we often, or at least that's me, right? Some of my books, I wrote them because I wanted to understand something better. So it was a way to force myself. I wrote The Truthful Art because I wanted to get myself a refresher on how to visualize descriptive statistics and to get a refresher about statistics. I said, I'm going to write a book about it because this is going to be super useful also for people who are afraid of statistics, like journalists and designers. The Truthful Art, as you know, is a book about statistics written for people who are afraid of statistics, right? How charts lie the same way. I wanted to think more systematically about how we misinterpret common charts. I had tons of ideas, but the way to put them together and to think clearly about them is to force yourself to write about them. You only understand something well when you are forced to explain it to somebody else. And a book is one way of doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, the sort of the key word that I tweaked on in that last paragraph was systematic. The book forces you to be systematic. And it's kind of the same thing with teaching as well. Like I actually, I credit and I acknowledge my workshop participants in my book, because they were constantly forcing me to basically be more systematic. If I couldn't get away with saying, well, sometimes you should make this design decision, sometimes you should make this other one, because I knew inevitably, like within the next 30 seconds, it's going to be, well, why? Why are you using, a bar chart instead of a line chart in this case? And so it really forces you to actually
come up with reasons, right? Come up with reasons.
And in fact, that was a real driver for me to write the book, as I started to see that there were opportunities to be more systematic about the basic spelling and vocabulary of data visualization, to go beyond sort of it depends and into, well, what exactly does it depend on?
I love that.
It was, and to be honest, it was incredibly difficult to do that. Like the decision trees, I hope they look relatively simple, but to be honest, that's probably the most cognitively demanding work I've ever done in my entire life. Right?
Which relates to one of the questions that we were planning to ask each other, which is what is the most challenging thing? Writing a book is never easy. What do you find more difficult? And that's exactly what you found difficult, right? Trying to distill all that knowledge about decision making into these diagrams, right?
Yeah, well, trying to not just distill it, but sort of systematize it, codify it, or formalize it. And so that was my goal, right? Was to basically avoid the sentence, "It depends." I know Andy Cockreef, who we both know is fond of that sentence, but I tried to really avoid it and force myself to think through, what exactly do these decisions depend on?
Depend on.
And that was very difficult. Like when getting into all of the kind of the logic of it, it was very satisfying at the end, because I did discover that in many cases there was an underlying logic to it. It wasn't just about judgment or intuition that you develop over time. It's like, no, actually, there are sort of fairly specific, sort of conditions that need to be met, and then you do this. But deciding, how do all of these factors relate to one another, like in terms of, okay, we have this data set. It's a simple data set. We're just trying to show, data over time. But I know that there's like 5 or 6 major ways of doing that, standard line chart, step chart, dot plot, bar chart, okay. So then these are not interchangeable. So what is the difference between these? When would you use them? And I sort of had to list out all the factors that go into that decision. And then the sequencing was so difficult to figure out, okay, what is the first kind of node in this decision tree? And then what is the next one? And which one goes before this? I almost lost my mind. It was
I found
incredibly difficult.
But I find that it's like there's something to admire about that systematic approach that you take about visualization, because I'm very different. I'm an agent of chaos, right? It's like the Art of Insight. I would not say that it's a very chaotic book, because it certainly has that narrative thread, that loop back home. It does have that, but I'm much more chaotic to my approach. My approach to visualization is not that systematic. I teach visualization in a similar way that I will teach writing. I will give people some basics, and then I will make them work. That's the way that my classes work. Show me, I'll give you feedback. Show me again, I'll give you feedback. And then for every iteration of the feedback in the feedback sessions, I will give you the reasons behind every single decision. So the knowledge will arise bottom up, rather than being, custom top down, right? But both approaches are perfectly valid. I mean,
well, and I use that approach as well. Right? Like when I'm teaching, I have design challenges in my workshop, and they occur relatively early in the workshop. And so I'll, give sort of some basics, and then say, okay, here's a scenario. And then people will, well, if it's in person, they draw on flip charts. If it's online, they use PowerPoint just to draw basic, shapes and whatnot. So like I'm very much a proponent of kind of in-person learning, but then because I don't have a lot of time with my participants, like my course is 2 full days, I have to kind of cut to the chase pretty quickly and say, okay, so what did we learn in this exercise? Oh, and look at this, we have this handy decision tree, which sort of encapsulates.
You equip them with some toolkits that they learned, can apply.
But it's not like, here's the decision tree. Like I never start with that. It's always starting either with a design challenge or with a quiz, where I have like an insight or a question to answer, and then there's various chart options, and people have to choose which one they think best kind of communicates that insight or answers that question. And then it's the decision tree comes at the end. It doesn't come at the beginning, but it's just with limited time. I have to kind of compress things a little bit.
Now, you mentioned before Steve Few, because I mean he's a common friend of both of us.
Of course.
And did you show him the book while you were writing it? Did you get any opinion from him?
No.
No, neither did I.
I mean, we talk regularly. It's just he's to a certain extent kind of moved on from data visualization. So when we talk, we're talking about sort of almost everything except data visualization.
He's a great reader. He loves to read about anything and everything.
Yeah, like he's unbelievably well read, and the breadth of his knowledge extends far beyond data visualization.
Steve has been so sort of like fundamental in my career, even if I disagree with him on many things, and I know that he will disagree with many things that I wrote for the Art of Insight. I know that his disagreements will always come with some very strong reasoning behind. And I love that about him, that he's such a systematic, honest, direct type of person.
Yeah, that I think certainly I know in my case, like none of this would be possible without Steve. What I learned from him, especially while teaching his courses, I mean, it was an incredible golden opportunity. He spent a lot of time teaching me, not just about data visualization, but about psychology perception, teaching. Of course, he's just a world-class teacher. and we don't see eye to eye. If Steve, of course, doesn't like pie charts. I actually, I'm going to put out my pie
I
chart
was going to
article
ask you
actually in
about
about
that.
2 weeks. I've decided to actually invite the mob into my brain, but it's becoming unavoidable at this point. And there are some other things with which we disagree, but I think that if I compare sort of the world before Show Me the Numbers to the world after Show Me the Numbers, it is not the same place. Like I think that he brought a lot of structure, a lot of sort of systems to data visualization, which were very helpful to innumerable people. And so I consider that, in a way, one of the things that I'm doing with these books is really maybe just taking kind of another step in that direction. But Steve took huge leaps before I did.
He did. Yeah. I do also mention this in the introduction of the book, right? You say, well, every book like this begins with like, we all, start, so like we are on top of the shoulders of giants and blah, 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 which is absolutely true. I mean, it's like, I usually say very openly and very honestly, 99% of the ideas that I'm going to present in this course are not my ideas. I will try to credit people as much as possible, and perhaps that other 1% is what I can build upon those shoulders of giants, if it is possible. There's something else that I almost forgot to mention before when we were talking about writing the book and the challenges. Something that I really enjoyed about your book is that even if the material that you cover is so serious and it has been presented in a very stern and serious way. I mean, Steve writes in that style, right? Your book is very lighthearted, and there's a lot of humor. There's even a note I think that at the very beginning, when you mentioned your editors, and you mentioned one of your editors said he or she hates that I use data as a singular noun or something like that, right? There's like a parenthesis
on the copyright page.
In the copyright page, and I noticed that, and it made me chuckle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, to be honest, to me that's not even very optional as a teacher. Like, it's obviously it's not everybody can really sort of pull it off, but I think it's almost essential to make it entertaining. Like, when I teach workshops, I think about it as a show. And that's something that I did learn from Steve, because yes, I mean, the tone of Steve's written books tends to be more serious, but in workshops he's cracking jokes, and and so I wanted to kind of bring that into the books as well. And it does make it harder to write. It does take more effort to kind of think, how can I kind of spin this and maybe sort of
without sounding cheesy,
bit of a fun way, exactly, without sounding cheesy or that kind of thing. And it is a kind of a tricky sort of line to walk. And initially, when I was writing blog posts and things like that, they tended to be more serious. But then I started kind of experimenting to see like how far can I push this? How much do people want? And the answer was always more. And so by the time
people love to smile, people love to laugh, and it's sort of like you need to break the ice somehow.
Like there's I think I have the book here. There's Make It Stick and then Made to Stick. I don't know if you've read those. Are phenomenal books, the Heath brothers, and they kind of talk about that too, essentially attaching emotion to information. And then of course it becomes much more the retention is much better, the comprehension is better. And humor it's not like a strong emotion, but it is an emotion. Like, if you attach a joke to something, people are actually more likely to,
it makes it more memorable, more approachable.
That's right. Yeah. And so it's serving a couple of purposes, I think. One is to help with retention, and also it's just to make it easier to get through, because as you know, there is a great potential for this topic to be incredibly boring. So if people start to get too bored, then they're not going to learn.
As long as you never forget what the core of our job is, which is to try to communicate well and reliably, right? Humor is a very important part. I recently edited a book by Nigel Holmes, the famous graphic designer, titled Joyful Infographics, and it's a delight to read. It's all a book about introducing subtle, sometimes not so subtle, but certainly elegant humor in visualization. I think that is a beautiful book. I really enjoyed editing it. It's just so much fun.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are worried about kind of sounding unprofessional, but I don't know. I really think of it differently. I think that, like, you know, all of the really good writers and teachers, not all, but a lot, will use humor if they can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's not just. I mean, it hopefully, anyways, it reads as just me kind of having fun, but it's very deliberate
Yeah.
in that sense. And I know that there's maybe sort of, you know, I was thinking about it as well before our conversation. I think I did approach the kind of the design of the book a little bit differently. Like, you know, some of the sort of humorous elements come from little call-outs that I have in the text, which are sort of things that like a kind of a grumpy reader or kind of a skeptical reader would
Yes.
say, and to sort of challenge me on things like that. And even, you know, I don't have any footnotes because to me, they kind of maybe interrupt the flow of reading a little bit. And so, you know, one of the sort of real benefits of working with Steve as well is that he taught me about self-publishing. And I think that was really useful in my case, because I don't know if a traditional publisher would have been okay with a lot of my, you know, design decisions in terms of having things like that, like little.
It would depend. I mean, there are some, for example, going back to the Art of Insight, I designed it myself. So there's another dirty little secret about the way that I write books, which is that I write the book while I am designing the layout. So
I saw that when you sent me a draft, it was an actual layout. I was like, oh, that's interesting.
I write in InDesign. I need to see the graphics. I need to see the layout in order to write effectively. That's a quirk in the way that I write. But I'm not the only one. I mean, going back to Nigel Holmes, he wrote a joyful infographics in InDesign as well, and there are many other people. Even if the design of the book is not particularly creative, because the Art of Insight doesn't have a particularly creative design, but it's a way to sort of like push you to keep writing, right? To actually see the book coming up to life, essentially, right?
Yeah.
If I write in Word, it's like I get bored. It's so dry. I don't see the actual book. I need to see the actual book in front of me.
Yeah, and of course, seeing the text in relation to the graphics, so the images, is so important in any book on this topic. Like, you know, my book, I haven't counted them, but it has over 500 charts in it. And so, like, you know, seeing like how the text relates to the book, I didn't write it in that way. Like, I wrote it in Word, but I cheated a little bit because it's you know, everything is kind of in line. Like, there's no floating images or sidebars or anything like that. It's basically text, image, text, image, text, image. But part of that so that I can see, you know, what text is going to be close to which images. But when I saw your draft and that it was basically done in InDesign, it's like, oh, maybe the next one, because I can totally see the appeal of it for this kind of book. For most books, I think it would not be, you know, as useful, but for a book about graphics,
even if the design, again, if the layout is very simple, it's useful, and it's a way to push yourself to keep writing because you see the book coming up to life.
So here, I need to ask you some questions.
Okay, go ahead.
So
go ahead. Well, I mean, we have been talking about everything and anything. So
it's incredibly fun. But what was something that you found very challenging?
Writing the damn book. I mean, this book is
beyond that. That's always a challenge.
Specifically. I mean, more specifically. Well, writing the book was challenging because this book is 2 years late. Because of personal reasons, life sometimes gets in the way, and I didn't have. So the most challenging part of writing a book, I think, is to find self-discipline, to discipline yourself to sit down and write a book. Any long-term project requires that. But if your mind is in other places, you cannot do it, obviously, right? There are people who are able. I find this fascinating, and also, I don't know, something to admire in people like these. There are people who are able, for example, to carve out 30 minutes every day to write. I'm not like that. I need entire days. So I need, for example, I have my writing days, which is usually Saturday, sometimes Monday. But I need the entire day because the actual writing part of the day is probably just 3 or 4 hours. The rest of the day, I'm goofing around, preparing my mind to write, getting some coffee, going for a walk, going to the gym. So it's like delaying the moment at which I need to sit down and actually start writing. So that's always challenging when you have a very packed schedule or some personal issues coming in. So that was a challenge. The other challenge, though, and now I come to the specifics, is because this book is so strange and it's so personal and it's so different to the other ones that I have written, and it's much less systematic than the previous ones that I have written. All my other books are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here are the steps. Here are the chapters. Here's how shots lie. 1, 2, 3, 4. They are very organized in that way. The Art of Insight is not like that. The Art of Insight is a personal journey. That's what it is. It's a personal journey through the minds of many different people. So the most challenging part was to actually write the prologue and the epilogue of the book, because I really wanted to wrap up things well, given that sign that I was coming back home, right? Like I was coming back to Ithaca to find myself again. Finally, though, it turned out pretty well. I think that is it might not be my best book, but it's certainly the best well-rounded book that I have ever written, because it has a very clear narrative arc, right, going back to the very beginning. But coming up with those two parts, the prologue and the epilogue, was super hard, and tried to strike the right note, trying to find the right references, making it personal and relatable without being too personal or too relatable in some sense. That was the most challenging part of writing the book. But I'm reasonably satisfied with the outcome. Even if I was hating myself while writing it, it's like, this is complete crap, which is also something that authors go through all the time. What we call the swamp of despair, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you enter the swamp of despair, but you need to keep pushing.
Yeah. You only see the problems and the flaws and the gaps. And
my writing sucks, whatever. And that's where friends are so useful. Right? It's like sending the draft to people like you or to many others, that I send the book to, and seeing that people found something useful and interesting in the book, that motivates you. Say, well, maybe something here, right?
I know. Well, hearing from you and from others who I sent manuscripts to, it was a big boost for sure, because it's such a solitary thing. Like, for so long you're in a cave basically, and you're like, is this any good? Like, is anybody
who's going to read these things?
Exactly. It's like, I hope this is good, because I've completely lost perspective on it. And I was kind of surprised though at the it's something I experienced while designing the courses, but also in writing the book, where I just found it was kind of, it was so draining, and I couldn't really figure out why. And the same thing, like I'd be good for 3 or 4 hours a day, and then I was just kind of spent really after that, and I would wake up at 2 a.m. to the point where I just have to have a notepad beside my bed. And I have actually, it's embarrassing to admit, I have a waterproof notepad. They sell those. It looks like paper, but it's actually kind of like plastic for the shower, because I was literally thinking about it all the time. And I was like, I got to get this out of my head. And I think, when you're working on something really big like this, like a book or a course or a research study or writing a play or something, I think in order to really make progress, and let me know what you think of this, you kind of have to hold the whole thing in your head.
Yes.
In order to know, like, where does this fit within the whole structure? Is there anything
having the idea sloshing in your mind? It's like you need
exactly
to marinate it in your brain.
It takes so long to kind of load it up into memory, that if I took a break for a few days, it would take me literally a day or two to actually get productive again, because I have to load the whole thing back up into memory. And so
it's super important to have a way to record your thoughts, because the best thoughts usually happen when you're in the shower, when you're in bed, or when you're exercising. In my case, is when I like to take long walks and meditate while I'm taking a long walk. And when I start meditating, my mind at some point starts wandering off a little bit, and then the book comes back to my mind, and the best ideas happen at that point. Or when I'm swimming in the swimming pool, and that you need to jump out and then get your phone and record the idea very quickly, because otherwise it will vanish and it will be gone forever.
But I found it deeply unpleasant, to be honest, like to have this thing in my head 24 hours a day. Because at some point I kind of realized, like, I just gonna have to basically push.
It's like a parasite that takes over.
Like it's, you at least in my case, I could think of almost nothing else, because it was just such a huge thing to keep in mind the whole time. And I wasn't sleeping well. Like,
Yeah.
I was probably irritable with other people, and I couldn't do anything else. Like, eventually I had to block off entire time, like cancel, not cancel workshops, but not accept workshops for like long periods in order
Yeah.
to actually get it done. But and I think that, I mean, there's actually three more books that I want to write, and I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah, I know, I
I'm
know, I
looking
know
forward to
how it
the end of it, but the process itself
they get it
was
started, and then the
awful.
process is awful. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's also, I mean, we're getting to the end of the conversation now, but
Mhm.
that actually relates to another question that I had, which is what comes next. I mean, you
Yeah.
have this book out in November the 15th, and what comes after it?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can see there's on this side, there's more practical charts, which is a kind of a follow-up companion book to practical charts. And I
Mhm.
split the book. Initially, it was one book, but I was thinking about it, and especially through interactions with my workshop participants, I realized that there's a lot of people who can only really use sort of quite basic familiar charts because of their audience, right? Their audience is not going to understand things like histograms and scatter plots, which you and I and most of the people that we know, of course, take for granted. But I learned, that many audiences do not understand those chart types. There's a good reasons why you don't often see them in the mass media, for example, because editors know that, people are going
Mhm.
to struggle with those. And so I split it apart. I put in practical charts. There's kind of 30 what I consider to be essential chart types most people are familiar with. And then there's 20 more in more
Mhm.
practical charts, where if you have an audience that's more technical, more sophisticated, you can pretty safely use these charts. Either they know them or they're going to grasp them relatively
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah,
But probably half of my readers are never going to be able to use these chart types
yeah,
in the second book. And so I didn't want to force them to buy and read content that they'll never
yeah,
use, right? They'll never need.
yeah.
So it's a second book.
So
Uh,
if I can make a comparison or an analogy, and I guess that you are
yeah,
not a tabletop gamer, but it's like you have written basic Dungeons and Dragons, and then the next one is going to be advanced Dungeons and
I did
Dragons.
play Dungeons and Dragons
I knew
when
it.
I
I
was
mean,
younger.
lots of people have played Dungeons and Dragons. I don't play
Yeah,
Dungeons and Dragons that much, but you have the
yeah,
basic and then you have the advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which
yeah,
is not
yeah. But
mandatory, but you can
well,
still do it.
it's no, exactly, and and I really struggled with what to even call it, because I don't. It's not like part two or anything, or volume two or anything like that. It's just, it depends on the audience that you
Yeah.
have, right? You may need this, and you may not,
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm about to start actually recording kind of an on-demand version of my course, my practical charts course, which actually covers all 50 chart types. And that'll probably be ready in January or so. This book will come out in January, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Hasn't officially been announced yet, so whoever watches
Okay.
this video
So
gets a bit
yeah,
of a
there's a
scoop.
premiere. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm probably going to switch focus back to dashboards.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
my dashboard course is actually slightly more popular than my charts course, but there's unfortunately, the dashboard, and business intelligence software that's out there it doesn't do a great job in terms of a lot of things that I'd want to do. And so I'm probably going to write a little open source application, a reference application, as a way to prompt the commercial vendors to do things maybe a little bit differently. But of course, that's going to be a big project.
Mm-hmm.
And then once that's done, then I'll write the dashboards book,
Yeah.
which will
Nice.
realistically come out at the end of the year if I'm lucky,
Nice.
2024.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. How about
honestly don't know
yourself?
what I don't know. I have no idea what I'm going to do next. I mean, when I was writing The Art of Insight, I was thinking, well, this is going to be, my last word about visualization. I've been writing about this thing for a couple of decades now. Maybe I have nothing in me more to say, whatever. But then I got to the very end and I said, well, maybe there's a follow-up to be written in which what I hint in the book about my own approach, my own way of doing things, maybe I
Mhm.
can write that a little bit more systematically and write a book that is also
Yeah.
a very personal one in which I say, this is not the way of making visualizations. This is my way of doing visualizations. And if you want to
Yeah.
borrow from it, here are the
Yeah.
many decisions that I make, right? Something like
Ultimately,
that.
that's all any of us can say,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. But
And
something
that's
like
very
that.
much the case in my books as well. And
Yeah,
I'm clear about that. Is
yeah, yeah.
every educator really, that's all I can say is this is
Mhm.
how I interpret the research. It's going
Yeah.
to be based on my professional
My own experience,
experiences,
my own
and
assumptions, my own views. So
yeah,
yeah, something like that. Or I may leave visualization aside for a while and perhaps broaden the scope a little bit. There are certain matters in data science that I would like to write about for a general public. So I'm extremely interested in probability, for example, and explaining probabilistic thinking to the general public.
Excellent.
Certain statistical fallacies. I think that there is a book to be written for the general public about them. I love board games, and I would like to design a board game at some point. I don't know. I have so many ideas. And then some sort of online course. Years ago, as you know, I did several massive open online courses that tens of thousands of people all over the world took.
Yeah.
And I whenever I visit another country, I'm always approached by people in, Brazil, Mexico, whatever, approaching me saying, I started my career thanks to those courses because they were free.
Wow.
And I didn't have money to pay for anything. So that sort of like planted in my brain the idea that, it's so rewarding. Perhaps, I should do another one of those in 2024. Yeah, but it still needs to be decided. I'm still sort of like still trying to rest a little bit after the Art of Insight is finished.
I believe it. I needed weeks or months to really fully recover. It took me probably 3 or 4 days just to stop thinking about it.
So think about the book
24 hours a day.
Yeah. So Nick, this has been an absolute pleasure. Congratulations on the book.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, to us both.
Yeah, to us both.
I look forward to the auspicious date of November 15th.
Thank you so much, my friend.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, fantastic discussion. Take care.
Take care.